it looks as if PSA has kind of responded to this conversation that's happening about card cleaning related to the Wemby 1/1 on Ryan Hoge. So he's the president of PSA Cards. He posted this. It's not on the official PSA site. I kind of wish it was, because you can see here, there's only 1,788 followers, whereas the actual official, and this has 88.1 thousand followers, and now one more, whereas his has like 1.7 followers. So it's kind of like a very subtle way of doing this, but it has caught on to a lot of social media people. So the fact that it's on here is still making its rounds to, more people than this would normally reach. So let's take a look at what this post says and then discuss this a little bit. So this is in relation to in a recent video that showed the walkthrough process of this card right here coming through PSA. At the end of the video, after it was already graded, when the people were still in the PSA building, they shouted out Kurt's Card Care. It's kind of obvious, like clearly they had used it on this card here. So this card, by many people's standards, it's an altered card. Whether that affects the value, in my video last time, somebody posed that question, and I thought it was a really interesting thing to think about. Like, now that people know this card has been cleaned, which to a lot of people's minds is altered, I wonder if that's going to affect its value if somebody goes on to try to sell it. Because by a lot of people's standards, that is now an altered card. If you try to sell a trimmed card that's altered or a colored card that's altered, and it's clearly altered and it's labeled as altered, then the value of it plummets. This is not labeled as altered, but now it's known as altered in many people's minds. I heard some people say that if it's caught, it's called altered. If it's not caught, it's called cleaned, which is kind of the way it is right now. But let's look at what Ryan Hoge, the president of PSA, actually said, and then talk about it a little bit. So it says here, lots of conversations about this card in recent days. I got to hold it and its cousin while they were both in-house. PSA stands by the original assessment, and our graders did not detect anything with the surface to deem it was altered. That said, I want to clarify, PSA does not approve of any chemicals or foreign substances being added to the surface of a card to improve the condition or appearance. If we detect this has happened to any card, we will consider it altered. So one, I'm glad they posted this. I wish they posted it on their PSA in the main site, but there's a lot of things in here to unpack. So for one, they mention here they did not detect anything. So I think this is going to be the key right here. If they detect something, it will be considered an altered card. If they can't detect it, of course they can't consider it that. But this card has been altered. The fact that they haven't detected it doesn't mean that it hasn't actually been altered. It's just that they couldn't detect that alteration. In my mind, this isn't that much different than if somebody was to trim a card, but they did such a good job on it that they didn't get caught, and that people later knew that it was trimmed, but it was labeled as like in a regular PSA holder. Would it be considered trimmed or not trimmed? A lot of people would say, even though this is slabbed as a not trimmed card, it is actually a trimmed card. It's a known trimmed card. I kind of feel in some ways this could happen to this card, that this card is kind of not labeled as altered, but we kind of know that it is altered now. So that's really interesting. I think the shout out that person made to Kurt's Card Care for a card like this was really risky. A card that's like a 1/1, there's already such a small number of people who are going to be potential buyers for a card like this. It's such a big card, such an expensive card. So if a percentage of the potential buyers step back from being a potential buyer for this card because they deem it to be altered, the card value could actually plummet quite a lot just because of that, because this is a well-known thing now in the hobby. So it was really not a very smart idea to go about shouting out Kurt's Card Care in relation to this video here. But anyway, I do think it's good that PSA has made a stand on this. It's very easy for a company like this to just kind of like sit back, not say anything because it could affect their bottom line. They're kind of coming out right off the bat when this is coming up in the conversation among the hobby, and they're saying something about it. And they're being very clear here too, which I think is nice, because it's one of these subjects that sometimes is not very clear. There's not a lot of clarity around it. But this does say, and I've heard SGC say something very similar, that PSA does not approve of any chemicals or foreign substances being added to the surface of a card. So whether somebody is caught or not caught is a secondary question. But the first question of whether this is actually officially recognized as an alteration by the grading companies is pretty clear right here, which I think is really important, because in the conversation among hobbyists, among card collectors, there's such a variety of perspectives about whether this is alteration or not. But when you have the companies kind of standing by something. I don't know. I feel like it puts a little bit more weight into this, and it makes it so that I think we can have a more nuanced conversation about this when there's not clarity from the company who is, kind of putting the final approval, which is really, I'm not saying that the grading company should have that power necessarily, but we have given grading companies that power as a hobby. At the moment, that's just the reality of it. It's not that I personally think it's great that they have so much power. It's just that they do right now. And now that they've taken this kind of stance, I do wonder if this kind of can change the conversation. Again, I don't know if enough people are going to be involved in this conversation for it to really change stance, because you really do need, in order for something like Kurt's Card Care, in order for a cleaning agent to become less and less common, it has to be more closely to universally deemed a bad thing, which I don't think it is right now. So I still think it's going to continue to be used. And in fact, the fact that they couldn't detect anything might even make it so that it's used more. It's like, oh, I can get away with it. It's not going to be detected. But I would say in some ways, this actually even says to me, again, be careful. Don't use it. Not be careful, but don't use it. If you're cleaning off that solution and you just miss the tiniest little bit, and as they're going through, they somehow detect it, boom, suddenly you have an altered card, and it's just, you can't unalter it. Once it's an altered card, that's how it is in their database, especially if it's a serial numbered card, they're just going to always be, it's always going to be in their database that way. So I would say do not clean a card. You risk having it detected as altered, which is just a terrible idea. I'm glad all this has happened, that this has come up as a conversation that we can discuss around it. I've heard some different conversations about the ethical standpoint of this. Again, I am very much standing on integrity. I very much believe that integrity needs to be at the heart of everything, and including the sports card world. I don't feel strong enough about cleaning being altered to feel like this is a hill I'm going to die on. There's other hills that I'd rather stand strong on. But at the same time, I do think this is a really good spot for us to have a conversation and to try to get closer to a kind of consensus on what is card cleaning. Is it actually a form of alteration or not? And this helps that conversation to become a little bit more clear here. So anyway, I just wanted to share this very quickly since it's breaking news, and I'm getting a little better here at sharing breaking news instead of a month later. So hopefully this was a useful video for you. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.